Okay, so last time we talked about a Zoom face-to-face hybrid, HyFlex. You had Zoom in class. It was pretty cool, right? So why do we need to deal with asynchronous at all? Asynchronous, of course, is where students can participate at a time of their own choosing, right? Asynchronous is about time. And to answer that, we're going to start with this phrase. You probably heard it, digital divide. But it's a largely misunderstood phrase. A lot of people think the digital divide is about equipment, right? But the fact is, a laptop, a good laptop right now, costs less than a biology textbook, right? You get a good laptop for $250, right? It's not about equipment. It hasn't been about equipment for a long, long time. The digital divide is about two things, really. The first is bandwidth, and you may have heard this discussion. The second is what we'll call home environment, right? And the second is getting more play lately. But the first one is actually well studied, right? The bandwidth issue is actually well studied. So let's talk about bandwidth, right? If you look at bandwidth in the U.S., right, it's a problem in all 50 states, even in the best states. And Washington is a pretty good state. 1 in 4 students, right? 1 in 4 students do not have adequate internet, right? And it's not only that 1 in 4 students don't have it, it's that the lack of adequate internet falls along these lines of geography, right? You see this, where urban, it's 1 in 5, and it's more than 1 in 3 in rural, but also falls along racial lines, right? And so again, for a white student, less than 1 in 5. For a black student, almost 1 in 3, right? And so you have these two issues. One is just a lot of people just don't have it. And again, Washington State does better than most, but a lot of people don't have it. The second issue, though, is there's disparities, right? And we have to be very careful when there are disparities because, of course, disparities tend to multiply, right? They tend to multiply privilege, right? They tend to multiply privilege. The people that have privilege sort of acquire more privilege. It's a privilege multiplier, right? Now, Zoom is great, right? But Zoom is also a bandwidth hog, right? It takes about 0.7 of gigabytes an hour download. And if you have those cameras on for the students, 0.7 gigabytes upload per hour, right? 1.4 if you total both the upload and download, if you want to do that way. And of course, that's for each session, right? If you have a house and you have multiple people in the house using it, that's like 1.4 a piece, right? That can really add up, right? And it starts to hit limits pretty quickly. So what can asynchronous do? Well, the first thing is that a Zoom recording is actually much less intensive than a live Zoom session. Right? A Zoom recording is if it's on the lower quality, it's about 0.2 gigabytes an hour. Not only that, but a person can choose the time they want to download it. They can choose to download the Zoom recording at a time when the rest of their house is not using, Zoom. They can go and they find an access point, right? So if there's an access point, if you supply an access point, they can go to the access point. They can download it and go home. They can buffer it, right? They don't have to have it all in real time. So if their internet's a little slow, they just wait until it buffers, right? So all of these elements mean that allowing students to interact with a recording can help get around some of the bandwidth constraints. It's just a more reliable way for those students with flaky bandwidth, right? So, that's sort of specific to Zoom. That's this bandwidth issue, right? But asynchronous can really help with the bandwidth issue. Let's talk about the other issue, though, right? We said bandwidth, and we said this kind of new emerging thing in our new environment is this home environment problem, right? Just kind of getting the arrows pointing the right way for bandwidth here. So what is the home environment problem? Well, if you think about a classroom, right? Think about a classroom. So, you have a classroom is a space that's sort of an equalizer. Everybody in the classroom's using the same space, right? All students have access to the same space, the same level of quiet, hopefully the same level of resources. I mean, there are disparities town to town, but within a classroom, they use the same space, right? So it's kind of an equalizer. It's a blank slate, which students can go to, and they all have equal chance to work in that space under the same conditions, right? Now think about students working from their houses in the context of a synchronous class, right? Some houses have lots of space, right? Some houses are quiet. They have lots of spaces quiet. Everybody has their own room and a desk to work at, right? Some houses not so much, right? Some houses not so much. Some houses don't have much space, right? It may not even be quiet. There may be noise outside that is just incredibly distracting at just different periods of the day, right? So these disparities in space, again, can cause inequities. The student may not, at a given time of day, have an adequate home environment to take your class online, synchronously, right? The different space means that some students will, and it means some students won't, right? So what does asynchronous do there? Here's the thing. If students can choose, right, their time, right, and choose their place where they connect, right, it can help mitigate this. So you imagine maybe it's a really noisy house at 10 a.m., right? But maybe at 3 p.m. it's not, right? Maybe they don't have a room available to themselves at noon, but they do at 8 p.m., right? So again, if we deal with bandwidth, we deal with home environment, right? Asynchronous, by really this process of time shifting mostly, right, can provide the flexibility that people with both bandwidth environments, different home environments need. And we'll talk next about, okay, that's great, Mike, but how do we deal with some of the issues of asynchronous participation, particularly the way that certain students can sort of fall off the map?